Our subject this morning is right and wrong, a subject we begin to learn about from our parents at a very early age, and which we continue to learn about until the day we die. How do we decide what is right and wrong? This is a task for each of us individually, but also collectively for us as couples, as families, organizations like churches, even nations. What standards can we apply? There are many ways of addressing the question of right and wrong. Over the centuries, there have been a progression of systems for this task. So I thought we should take a look at some of them. One way of deciding between right and wrong is to rely on revealed truth. A good example familiar to most of us would be the Ten Commandments. These have been in existence for thousands of years, and they can be found in the scriptures of the faiths of Abraham, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. You probably know there are even earlier prescriptions of right and wrong, for example, the Code of Hammurabi from the Middle East, which is older than the Ten Commandments. Scripture tells us that Moses received the Ten Commandments directly from God. Of course, this illuminates one of the basic problems with revealed truth, and that is, it isn't revealed to everybody, usually only to one person or to a few. There may be different revelations to different people and at different times. The problem with revealed truth is that a pluralistic society can't use something which has been revealed only to a few as the basis for its laws. We may have done this 100 years ago or more here in the U.S., which we often thought of as a Christian nation, even though our Constitution prohibits the official adoption of any religion by the state. Islamic countries still base their legal systems on the teaching of their faith today. But as Islamic countries become more diverse, I would guess this is probably going to change, although it will take a long time. Relying on sacred scripture as a basis of laws also brings up an interesting question about sacred scripture itself. And that is this: is sacred scripture supposed to be directive, or is it simply supposed to be inspiring? Another method. The 18th century philosopher Immanuel Kant described what he called the categorical imperative. He said, "An act which cannot be universalized is improper." For example, it would be improper for everybody to throw their trash. If it would be improper for everybody to throw their trash in the river, then it is improper for anybody to throw their trash in the river. This is a local question. We see it play out right here today in development issues in Rappahannock County. Generations of my family have dumped their sewage into the river. Why can't I? In the 19th century, Jeremy Bentham and others developed the idea of what they called utilitarianism. They said, that act which produces the greatest good for the greatest number of people is a right act. Bentham defines good as satisfaction, contentment, happiness, and security. That sounds pretty good. It's an attractive idea and very democratic with that reference to the greatest number of people. But the scholar Mortimer Adler came up with a good example which throws utilitarianism into question. Here it is. Imagine you are a surgeon in a large metropolitan hospital. An old high school acquaintance calls on you at the hospital. He didn't do very well in school. He has no friends and no family, and he hardly knows anybody. He is out of work. He's nevertheless a young man in good health. He asks you for a place to sleep for the night, so you, the surgeon, sneak him into a room that the doctors sometimes use to rest, and he falls fast asleep. Before long, there's a huge traffic collision in which a dozen or more people are brought into the hospital by ambulance, all of them needing a transplant of some kind, or they will die. One needs a spleen, one needs a liver, one needs a lung, one needs an eyeball, and so forth. There is no way you can get all these body parts and save all these people. Ooh, but wait a minute. If you just take your young, healthy, but worthless friend and put him out, you can harvest all those organs from him and save all those people. This clearly would provide the greatest good for the greatest number of people. But any school child could tell you it would be wrong. So much for utilitarianism. In the 20th century, Sigmund Freud wrote about what he called determinism. He thought right and wrong were not useful concepts because a person has no control over how he or she acts. Our acts are caused by forces beyond our control. This may be useful in helping us understand ourselves and our weaknesses. The problem is, it can be used to help us avoid all responsibility. How are we to determine right and wrong for ourselves and those around us in these troubling and difficult times? Were the 43 U.S. senators who voted not to convict our former president of inciting an insurrection on January 6 right or wrong? Were the public officials in Texas who decided not to incur the expense of winterizing the state's electrical grid right or wrong? How are we to determine right or wrong in the distribution of the coronavirus vaccine, which seems to be going much more to white people than to persons of color? The experience of the German people gives us instructive examples. In the period before World War II, in Germany there was widespread abortion, medical experimentation on people without their consent, extermination of the old, infirm, disabled, and mentally challenged. Finally, whole ethnic groups, first gypsies and then Jews, were scheduled to be wiped out, and millions of them were. Whatever your position on abortion, you can understand as a result of all that why the German people put into their constitution the words, "Every person has the right to life." Experience is a powerful teacher of right and wrong. Today, technology presents us with many questions about right and wrong. You can imagine them. Can Google gather information about the searches I make and sell it to others? Does somebody have a right to blank out their caller ID so I can't tell who is calling me? There are also many, many issues of right and wrong in the medical area. Should abortion be permitted? If so, at what point in the pregnancy should that permission end? We are beginning to learn about cloning. Should parents working with a fertility clinic be able to choose elements of their unborn child's physiognomy and personality? Should surrogate motherhood be permitted? Under what circumstances? When it takes place, what are the rights and responsibilities of the egg mother and the birth mother? These are not easy questions. There are many difficult questions at the end of life. Who should be able to decide about the removal of life support equipment? Should do not resuscitate orders be permitted? What about euthanasia or assisted suicide? I was well acquainted with a UU minister until quite recently. She was painfully dying of cancer and decided to end her own life. She lived in Oregon, where this is permitted, and so she gathered her husband and other loved ones around her while she drank a solution that would bring about her death gently in a few minutes. Was this right or wrong? There are many ways of assessing right and wrong. We have looked at some of them. Revealed truth in sacred scripture. The problem with this is, whose scripture? What about those who revere other sacred writings? The categorical imperative, which tells us that behavior which can be universalized is right. The problem is, what if we have long been doing something which we now learn cannot be universalized, like dumping our sewage in the river? Utilitarianism, which teaches us that the greatest good for the greatest number of people is right. The problem is that a small number of people, least able to speak up for themselves, may be badly wronged. Determinism, which tells us that there is no right or wrong because we are controlled by irresistible forces. The problem with this is it relieves us of all responsibility to try to do the right thing. And finally, experience, which is a powerful teacher whose lesson is not likely to be forgotten. The problem with experience is not everyone has the same experience and learns the same lesson. The determination of right and wrong is a work of faith, a work of reason, a work of community. It is a lifelong work, never ended as long as we walk this earth. It is one of the reasons we gather in this community of faith. It is our duty to strive to understand what is right and what is wrong, and then to do that which is right, to refrain from doing that which is wrong, to teach this to our children, and to share it in this community. Let us all continue to do this important work as we walk together on our spiritual journeys. These are some of my thoughts on this cold but sunny day about right and wrong. What thoughts do you have?